He thought it was a beggar's lie. A street orphan approached his son, claiming they were brothers. The millionaire father ordered a DNA test, expecting to expose a fraud and protect his perfect family image. But when the result came back, it didn't just prove a connection. It detonated the very foundation of their lives. Father was a self-made tech magnate, a man who built an empire on data and certainty. His family, a wife, a son in private school, a sprawling estate, was his ultimate proof of success. But when a ragged 10-year-old boy appeared with a photograph and an impossible story, that certainty shattered. Was this a cruel scam targeting his wealth, or was there a hidden thread connecting his pristine world to the city's forgotten streets? The answer would force him to question every truth he thought he owned. His name was Robert Vance. By 45, he turned a university coding project into Viridian Systems, a billion-dollar data analytics giant. His public image was polished marble, philanthropic donor, devoted husband to Elena, proud father to 10-year-old Sebastian, who attended the prestigious Oak Ridge Academy. Their world was one of gated communities, charitable galas, and absolute control. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in September, Sebastian came home from school quieter than usual. When pressed, the boy revealed a strange encounter. A new student, wearing clothes too big and shoes falling apart, had approached him at recess. The boy claimed his name was Leo, and he said they shared the same father. Robert dismissed it instantly. Children have wild imaginations. It was a prank, perhaps a calculated one by a family looking for a handout. He instructed Sebastian to ignore the boy, but the story didn't fade. A week later, Robert's personal assistant forwarded an email sent to the company's public inquiry address. It was from a social worker at a downtown youth shelter. Attached was a scanned, crumpled photograph of a younger Robert Vance, arm around a woman who was not his wife. The email stated a 10-year-old boy named Leo, currently in temporary care, possessed this photo and was insisting he was Robert's son. The social worker, bound by duty, was making a tentative inquiry. Robert's first reaction was cold fury. This was extortion, a digital deepfake. He had lawyers send a cease and desist letter. Yet that night, in the silence of his study, he examined the scanned image. The photo was real. It was taken nearly 12 years prior at a tech conference after-party in Miami. The woman was Lillian Cole, a freelance journalist he'd briefly known. A passionate, chaotic fling that lasted less than 2 months, buried under the relentless launch of Viridian's flagship product. He had ended it cleanly, he thought. He never saw her again. The timing, if the boy was 10, was chillingly plausible. Elena noticed his distraction. When he finally showed her the email, her face didn't crumple in betrayal. It hardened into a mask of analytical disdain. "This is a threat vector," she stated, her voice the same one she used in board meetings. "We contain it, we disprove it, we make it disappear." Her certainty was his anchor. Together they formulated a plan not of compassion, but of legal warfare. They would not meet the boy. Instead, they would engage a private investigation firm, the discreet kind used by corporations for hostile takeover intelligence. Their mandate was twofold: dig up every scrap of dirt on Lillian Cole and obtain a DNA sample from the child Leo, by any means necessary. The investigators moved fast. The report on Lillian Cole was a portrait of a downward spiral. After the Miami conference, her freelance career had stalled. She battled addiction, moving between low-rent apartments and eventually women's shelters. She gave birth to a boy, Leo, listed the father as unknown on the birth certificate. She'd been in and out of rehab, and Leo had spent time in foster care. 18 months ago, Lillian had overdosed. Leo, then 9, entered the system. The report noted he was a quiet, resilient child, fiercely protective of a single tattered photograph of his mother with a man no one could identify. Until now. The second part of the operation was colder. An investigator, posing as a child wellness volunteer at Leo's group home, organized a health day. Cheek swabs were offered for a fictitious genetic wellness screening. Leo, wanting to be like the other kids, complied. A sealed sample was delivered to Robert's lawyer, who forwarded it to a private lab alongside a sample from Sebastian, procured from his toothbrush. The stage was set for a definitive, private annihilation of the claim. Robert waited for the result with the impatience of a man used to data delivering clear, binary answers. He expected a one-page report stating 0% probability of paternity. He would then use that document to silence the social worker, threaten legal action against the shelter for harassment, and seal the breach in his family's wall. He planned to donate a large, anonymous sum to the shelter's parent organization, Conscience Money, and a final piece of strategic optics. The call from the lab came not to his lawyer, but to his private mobile. The director, a man paid a hefty retainer for discretion, sounded unnerved. Mr. Vance, the standard autosomal comparison is complete. However, we are seeing a highly unusual marker alignment that requires additional Y chromosome testing for definitive interpretation. The initial read indicates a close biological relationship between the two subjects, but the pattern is atypical for a standard half-sibling match. Robert's world, built on the clean logic of algorithms, hit a syntax error. "What does that mean in plain English?" he demanded, his voice tight. There was a pause on the line, the sound of careful phrasing. "It means the initial analysis suggests the boys are genetically related, but the specific nature of that relationship isn't what you hypothesized. The full answer is in the more detailed test. We need your authorization to proceed." Robert stood in his panoramic office, the city lights blurring below. The clean, binary answer was gone, replaced by a terrifying, open-ended question. He thought he was testing for a lie. The science was now hinting at a truth far more devastating. He gave the authorization, and as he hung up, a new corrosive doubt seeped in. This wasn't about a stranger's child anymore. This was about his own son, Sebastian, about his wife, Elena, about every foundational truth of the last decade. The DNA result was now a ticking bomb, and when it detonated, it wouldn't just reveal a secret, it would rewrite history. The final report arrived 48 hours later, not as an email, but as a sealed, hand-delivered envelope. Robert opened it alone in his study, the quiet of the room amplifying the rustle of paper. The cover page was a clinical summary. It confirmed the boys, Leo and Sebastian, shared a significant percentage of DNA, but the conclusion, printed in stark black type, was not the one he had braced for. It read, "Genetic analysis indicates a 99.9% probability that the subjects are full siblings, sharing both biological parents." The words didn't compute. Full siblings, both parents. The air left his lungs. If Leo was his son and Sebastian was his son and they were full brothers, then Elena was Leo's mother. The logic was inescapable yet impossible. Elena, who had met his furious denials with cool strategy. Elena, who had never once in 12 years of marriage mentioned a pregnancy, a child, a surrender. The photograph of him with Lillian Cole was a red herring, a tragic, misdirecting clue. The secret wasn't his infidelity, it was hers. He confronted her that night, the report on the glass table between them like a live grenade. He expected more denials, legal deflection. Instead, she gazed at the document, her posture eroding from its usual steel into something weary and ancient. "His name was Leo?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. That single question was the confession. The story that followed was a gutting narrative of a different Elena, one from before the gala benefits and the board seats. 23 years old, ambitious and terrified, she'd become pregnant early in their relationship, just as Robert's startup was securing its first major funding round. He was stressed, working 18-hour days, talking of nothing but market capture. She saw the pregnancy as a catastrophe, a derailment of his trajectory and her own. A friend knew a couple, she said, a journalist named Lillian Cole, who was struggling to conceive. An arrangement was made, informal and shrouded in shame. Elena would carry the child. Lillian would adopt it at birth. No records would link them. It was to be a clean, permanent severance. But Lillian's life unraveled. The adoption was never formalized through proper channels. The arrangement became a secret handoff, a truth hidden from the child, Leo, who grew up knowing Lillian as his only mother. Elena had buried the memory, compartmentalizing it as a painful but necessary sacrifice for their future. She never imagined that Lillian's collapse would send Leo, years later, clutching a photograph of Robert, into the system, searching for his roots. Robert was engulfed by a dual tsunami of betrayal and heartbreak. He had been deceived, but so had Leo. A child had grown up in poverty and loss, while his biological brother lived in unimaginable privilege. The injustice was visceral, yet a more immediate problem erupted. The social worker, unsatisfied with the legal threats and silence, had escalated the case. A family court judge, reviewing the shelter's petition for clarity on Leo's guardianship, ordered a court-mandated paternity test. Robert's private, controlled experiment was about to become a public record. Panic shifted his focus from marital collapse to crisis containment. He couldn't let the court test proceed. That result would create a permanent, official link between him and Leo, exposing everything. His legal team scrambled, filing motions to block the test, citing privacy and potential harassment. But the judge, a stern woman known for prioritizing child welfare, was unmoved. She set a hearing date. The Vance family would have to appear. The walls were closing in. In the digital world caught fire. An anonymous tip was sent to a popular tech gossip blog. It didn't name Leo, but it asked a tantalizing question. What secret is Viridian's CEO hiding about a second son? It included a blurred but recognizable photo of Robert from the Miami conference. The blog published it with the headline, Silicon Valley Air Mystery. The story was niche, but it rippled. Reporters began calling Viridian's PR department. Twitter threads speculated. The pristine Vance family narrative had its first public crack. Robert realized the fight was no longer contained to a lab or a courtroom. It was a battle on three fronts: legal, public, and profoundly personal. He had to see Leo, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person. He arranged a visit at the group home, against the advice of his lawyers and the icy silence of Elena. He walked into a sterile common room, and there he saw the boy from the report. Leo was smaller than Sebastian, with a watchful stillness. He looked at Robert, not with hope or accusation, but with a simple, devastating recognition. "You're the man from the picture with my mom," he said. "She said you were important, that you'd be busy." In that moment, the billionaire, the strategist, the betrayed husband vanished. All that remained was a father looking at a son who had been lost. Robert knelt down, his voice thick. "I didn't know," he said, the words utterly inadequate. Leo just nodded, as if he'd heard every adult excuse before. He asked one question. "Is Sebastian really my brother?" Robert, with the court order hanging over him and the blog posts circulating online, could only tell the truth. "Yes, Leo, he is." Driving away, Robert knew the calculus had irrevocably changed. This was no longer about protecting a brand or a marriage. It was about a 10-year-old boy in a system that had failed him, a boy who was his son. He had to get custody, but to do that, he would have to publicly claim him. And to claim him, he would have to detonate his own life. The hearing was in 72 hours. He had to decide, continue the legal charade and risk losing Leo forever, or step into the spotlight and embrace the chaos. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. The voice on the other end was a reporter from a major national newspaper. "Mr. Vance," she said, "we're preparing a story about a child named Leo Cole and a court-ordered paternity test linked to you. Would you care to comment?" The private bomb was now ticking in public. The next move would define everything. Robert Vance hung up the phone, the reporter's question echoing in the silence. He had given the only answer he could: no comment. It was a fuel canister on a smoldering fire. The story broke at 6 a.m. the next morning. The headline was brutal: "Billionaire's Secret Son, a Courtroom DNA Drama." It stopped being a tech blog rumor and became front-page news. Photographers camped outside the gates of his estate. Viridian Systems, stock price opened down 8%. The board, a collection of friends turned nervous investors, demanded an emergency meeting. His carefully constructed world was now a public spectacle. Inside the house, the atmosphere was glacial. Elena moved through the rooms like a ghost, speaking only through her lawyer who had drawn up a provisional separation agreement. She was not fighting for the marriage. She was fighting for her share and for Sebastian. She presented Robert with an ultimatum: disavow Leo publicly, settle the court case with a closed adoption to another family, and she would stay, and the public story could be managed as an extortion attempt. If he acknowledged the boy, she would file for divorce, seek full custody of Sebastian, and take half of everything, tanking the company's stability further. The choice was framed not as moral, but as financial and strategic: his empire or his newly discovered son. But Robert had already made his choice in the group home, looking into Leo's eyes. He told Elena he was going to court to claim his child. She left that afternoon with Sebastian, moving to a penthouse hotel suite. The photo of them leaving, Sebastian looking back confused, became the next day's tabloid cover. The personal collapse was now complete. The hearing was a circus. Media vans lined the street. Robert walked in alone, facing a gauntlet of shouted questions. Inside the sterile courtroom, the opposing parties had multiplied. It was no longer just the state. Elena's lawyers were there, arguing that introducing an unstable, traumatized child into the Vance home would be detrimental to Sebastian's welfare. a clear prelude to custody war. Then a new party stood, a stern-faced woman named Patricia Cole, Lillian's older sister. She had petitioned the court for custody of Leo, her nephew. She presented herself as stable, middle-class, and family. She argued Robert was a stranger, a negligent figure who had only appeared when forced by scandal. The judge now had three potential paths for Leo: state custody, placement with a blood relative, or placement with a newly acknowledged biological father who was currently at the center of a media hurricane. Robert took the stand. For the first time under oath, he acknowledged Leo as his son. He outlined a plan: immediate therapy, enrollment in a new school, integration into his life. He didn't hide his mistakes, his ignorance, or the mess. He simply stated his intent to be a father. When the judge asked him about the tumult, the press, the effect on the child, Robert was honest. "I cannot make the spotlight disappear, Your Honor. But I can stand in it with him and shield him as best I can." The ruling was a split decision. The judge granted Robert temporary physical custody, pending a full home study and psychological evaluation. But she also granted Patricia Cole visitation rights, recognizing the importance of the boy's connection to his maternal family. It was a fragile, contested victory. Leo would come home with him, but the battle for his future was far from over. Bringing Leo to the empty, echoing mansion was a disaster. The boy was terrified of the space, the silence, the staff. He didn't touch the toys in the room prepared for him. He sat on the floor, clutching his backpack. That night, Robert found him asleep not in the bed, but in the walk-in closet, as if seeking the smallest, safest space. The chasm between their lives was a physical ache. Robert cancelled all non-essential work, turning his home office into a command center for a different kind of project: becoming a parent. A week in, the doorbell rang. It was Patricia Cole. She had brought a photo album. Sitting in the living room, she showed Leo pictures of his mother as a girl, of grandparents he never knew. She was not the villain Robert had anticipated. She was a grieving sister, desperate to keep a piece of Lillian alive. She looked at Robert and said, "You have the money and the power, I have the memories. He needs both. Can we agree on that?" An uneasy truce was forged. But just as a fragile stability seemed possible, the "wait, it gets worse" moment detonated. It came from an email forwarded by his now-diminished PR team. A financial crime investigation blog had run a deep dive into the timing of Viridian's early funding rounds, juxtaposed with Alina's pregnancy and the subsequent adoption arrangement. The article posed a devastating question: had Robert Vance used the promise of an unborn child as collateral or a bargaining chip in a business deal? It was speculation, but it cited unnamed sources from the old startup circle. The insinuation was monstrous, that he hadn't just abandoned a child, but had commodified one. The story went viral in finance circles. The board's emergency meeting turned toxic. Major investors, fearing a reputational black hole, demanded his immediate resignation as CEO. The company he built was slipping from his grasp. That same afternoon, Alina's lawyer served new papers. Citing the financial scandal blog post, she was now seeking an emergency hearing to strip Robert of custody of Sebastian, alleging he was morally unfit and that his deteriorating public and financial situation created an unsafe environment. She was using the very chaos she helped create to take his first son away. Robert stood in his quiet house, Leo at school under the watch of a security detail to avoid photographers, and faced the abyss. He was about to lose his company, his wife, and possibly both of his children. Every pillar was cracking. He had chosen to do the right thing by Leo, and it felt like it was costing him everything else. But in the eye of the hurricane, a clarity formed. He had been trying to preserve a ghost, the life he thought he had. That life was already gone. His only real assets were the two boys, connected by blood and circumstance. The path forward wasn't about saving the empire. It was about building something new from the rubble. He placed two calls. The first was to his board chairman. He agreed to step down as CEO immediately, but negotiated to remain as a major shareholder and a strategic advisor. It was a surrender, but it took the financial pressure off the company and partially defused the media frenzy. The second call was to his lawyer. He instructed them to not fight Alina's motion for primary custody of Sebastian for now. Instead, he demanded ironclad, extensive visitation rights. He would not drag his eldest son through a vicious court battle. He would build a relationship from the ground up, on new terms. Then he walked into the living room, where Leo was carefully looking at Patricia's photo album. He sat beside him. "It's a lot, isn't it?" Leo just nodded. Robert didn't offer platitudes. He said, "A lot of it is my fault. I'm sorry, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Leo leaned sideways, his shoulder touching Robert's arm. It was a small, silent signal of trust, more valuable than any stock portfolio. He had given up the throne. He had let go of the facade of a perfect family. He was starting over with a 10-year-old boy who had nothing, and a 10-year-old boy he had to rebuild a relationship with. It was the end of one life, and the terrifying, uncertain beginning of another. The fallout was over. Now came the hard part, building something real. The first year was a quiet earthquake. Robert Vance, former CEO, became a man defined by school schedules and therapy appointments. He moved with Leo from the cavernous estate to a large, comfortable home in a neighborhood with trees and sidewalks. The paparazzi interest faded, replaced by the mundane challenges of parenthood. Leo, initially shell-shocked, began to thaw. He started calling Robert Dad in August, a word that hit with the force of a sledgehammer and a balm simultaneously. The court-ordered home study concluded, granting Robert permanent legal custody. The agreement with Patricia Cole evolved into a structured arrangement. Leo spent every other weekend with her, connecting with his mother's family history. It was not without tension, but it was functional. Meanwhile, Robert's relationship with Sebastian was rebuilt in fragments. Every other weekend and Wednesday dinners, under the watchful eye of Elena, who had finalized the divorce and taken a senior role at a rival firm. The boys, Leo and Sebastian, were the bridge. Their initial awkwardness, born of vastly different worlds, slowly gave way to the natural conspiracy of brotherhood. They shared a love of a particular space-themed video game, and in the glow of the screen, the differences in their upbringing momentarily vanished. Robert's reduced role at Viridian allowed him to channel his energy and resources into a new venture, the Lillian Cole Foundation, focused on family preservation and support for children in the foster system. He poured millions into it, not for publicity, but because Leo had asked, one night, what happened to the friends he'd left at the group home. It was a tangible legacy born from the wreckage. But the past has a long tail. 2 years after the scandal broke, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm representing the estate of Lillian Cole. In going through her scant personal effects, her sister Patricia had discovered a small, fireproof lockbox. Inside was a handwritten letter from Lillian, dated just months before her death. It was addressed to my son, Leo, and it contained the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The letter revealed that Lillian Cole had not been a struggling journalist who yearned for a child. She had been a gestational surrogate. A young, financially desperate Elena Vance, upon learning of her pregnancy, had not arranged a private adoption with a friend. She had, through a discreet and legally dubious intermediary, hired Lillian to carry the child to term for a lump sum, with the agreement that Lillian would disappear afterward. But Lillian, after giving birth, found she could not sever the bond. She breached the contract, kept the baby, and used the money to try and start a new life, a life that ultimately spiraled into addiction and tragedy. The photograph of Robert was not from a romantic fling. Lillian had secretly taken it during a chance encounter at that Miami conference, a tangible link to the biological father of the son she loved. Robert read the letter in stunned silence. The narrative he had believed, a secret pregnancy, an informal adoption born of desperation, was itself a facade. The truth was colder, more transactional. Elena hadn't given away a child out of fear. She had outsourced a pregnancy. The DNA test had not just destroyed a perfect family image. It had exposed a foundational lie about the family's very origin. He confronted Elena with the letter. She offered no new tears, only a cold, resigned acknowledgement. "We wanted different things," she said. "You wanted a legacy, I wanted a life. That child was an obstacle to both at the time." The moral chasm between them was now unbridgeable. He had to decide whether to tell Leo. He consulted child psychologists and painfully Patricia Cole. The consensus was that the truth, however harsh, was his history. On a calm Saturday afternoon, Robert sat Leo down and shared the letter. He explained in gentle terms that his mother Lillian had chosen him against all odds, that she had fought to keep him, and that her love was the central, undeniable truth of his story. Leo listened, his brow furrowed. After a long silence, he asked, "So my first mom didn't want me, "But my second mom did," Robert nodded, his heart breaking. Leo then said, "Then I had one mom who loved me. That's more than some kids get." The resilience of the child continued to humble the man. The revelation reframed everything, but it didn't destroy the new world they had built. If anything, it solidified Robert's mission. The Foundation's work took on a sharper focus. He and Leo began speaking together, anonymously at first, at foster care advocacy events. Leo, now 12, would say, "I was lost, but then I was found. Every kid should get found." It became their mantra. 5 years after the street orphan approached the wealthy boy at school, the Vance family portrait looks nothing like it once did. Robert is a full-time philanthropist. Sebastian, now 15, splits his time between two homes but shares a quiet, solid bond with his brother. Leo is a thriving 7th grader, a fierce advocate for foster kids, and a surprisingly talented pianist. The perfect, glossy image is gone, replaced by something real, scarred, and strong. The final surprise came not from a lab or a letter, but from a gesture. On Robert's 50th birthday, Leo presented him with a gift. It was a new, simple frame. Inside was the original crumpled photograph of Robert and Lillian, but next to it, Leo had placed a recent picture of the two of them, father and son, building a birdhouse in the backyard. The caption, in Leo's handwriting, read, "Then and now, both true." In that moment, Robert understood that the DNA test had indeed destroyed a perfect family image. But in its place, it allowed a real family to be built, not on a foundation of secrets and status, but on a foundation of hard-won truth and chosen love. The detonation was not an end, it was a necessary clearing. The story of Robert and Leo Vance is a modern parable written in genetic code. It asks a question that echoes in the silent moments of every family. How well do we really know the stories we tell about ourselves? In an age where a simple cheek swab can rewrite decades of assumed history, the ground beneath our feet is less solid than we imagine. Studies suggest that for millions who take these tests, the results deliver not just ancestry reports, but profound, life-altering shocks. The perfect family is often a narrative, carefully edited and maintained. And sometimes, it takes a single, unvarnished truth to shatter that narrative, forcing a painful, beautiful rebuilding. Robert Vance entered this storm believing he was defending his legacy. He emerged understanding that legacy isn't what you build for yourself, but what you leave in others. For Leo, the journey was different. It was not about gaining wealth, but about gaining a place, a name, a father who chose to stay. Their story underscores a brutal but hopeful reality. The families that survive these seismic revelations aren't the ones that were perfect. They are the ones that become real. The rise of direct-to-consumer DNA testing has created a silent, global audit of paternity and family lines. It has given voice to hidden children and unveiled secrets buried for generations. It forces us to confront the fact that family is not just a biological contract, but a continuous act of choice and commitment. The Vances' journey through scandal, loss, and eventual grace shows that while science can reveal a biological connection, only humanity can forge a bond. So what is the lingering question? Perhaps it's this. In a world where our deepest secrets are just a lab result away from exposure, what matters more, the truth we inherit or the truth we choose to build after? The answer, as Robert and Leo learned, is both. The past can detonate, but the future is always a choice. If this story of shattered images and rebuilt lives resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. For more documentaries that explore the profound intersections of family, secrets, and the human condition, subscribe to our channel and click the bell. Your next revelation awaits.